In this video lecture, we are going to study the history of ancient India for the time period which is referred to as Vedic Civilization or Vedic period. So now let us understand what was this Vedic period, when was this established in India, and who were the people who lived during that time period. So let's understand what is this Vedic civilization or Vedic period all about. So the cities of Harappan culture had declined by 1500 BC. So as you are aware that the earliest recorded history of India dates back to Indus Valley civilization. So Indus Valley civilization had established in India somewhere around 2500 BC. So Indus Valley civilization had established, around parts of which is most of it is now in Pakistan. So areas of Pakistan, neighboring Punjab, Haryana, large parts of Gujarat, and some parts of Uttar Pradesh. So this was the seat of Indus Valley civilization. So now this Indus Valley civilization, after reaching its peak, so they gradually began to decline around 1500 BC. So once they declined, so once a civilization declines, it gets replaced by another one. So that is what happened to the Indus Valley civilization as well. So it saw its decline by 1500 BC. The Indus Valley civilization was almost in shape of decline. So when Indus Valley civilization was almost near its end, at the same time, certain tribes, certain tribes in large groups started to settle in these areas. Which area? The area which was previously occupied by the people of Indus Valley civilization. So these tribes were distinct in the sense that they were Sanskrit speaking. They used to speak the language of Sanskrit. So they came from somewhere and they started to settle in the region which was previously the seat of power of Indus Valley civilization. So some theories suggest that these Aryan tribes were probably migrating from the steppes region of Russia, so cold region of Russia. So these tribes, they were looking for new home. They wanted to settle in a greener land where they can have ample food for their cattle and for themselves. So they were always moving, looking in search for their permanent home. So in this process, these tribes have arrived at the same location where Indus Valley people used to live, and they were almost gone now. They have declined by them. So this vast land was now occupied by these Aryan tribes. So you can say that the Harappan civilization was replaced by these Aryan people, and these Aryan tribes started a new civilization, a civilization of their own, and it is this civilization that we know today as the Vedic civilization. So the Vedic period or the Vedic age refers to that time period when the Vedic Sanskrit texts were composed. So these tribes, as we already saw, so they had a distinct feature. So the distinct feature was that they used to speak the language of Sanskrit. So during their civilizational existence, so they have created so many Sanskrit texts. So this civilization or this time period of Indian history is famous for the fact that so many Sanskrit texts were generated. So this is sum total of Vedic civilization. So this will give you a rough idea that how Vedic civilization was different than its ancestors, means the previous civilization of Indus Valley. So how they were different? Because these people used to speak a brand new language, a language which was not spoken by Indus Valley people. So it indicates that these were not the same people. They had come from somewhere else because their language was totally different. So this is how the Vedic civilization began in India, and it began at around 1500 BC and lasted until 600 BC. So almost for a time period of 1000 years this civilization lasted. So now let's see who these people were. Who were these tribes that we are talking about? So these tribes were referred to as Aryans. So today, or shall I say that during the Vedic age, these tribes used to call themselves as Aryans. So this name Aryan is not given by historians. So this name was given by the tribes themselves. So Aryans were group of many tribes. Aryans were not a single tribe. It's not that they were one single tribe coming from one single place, but in fact they were group of many tribes, of which five are most prominent. So out of so many different tribes that came to be known together as Aryans, actually Aryans were combination, or you can say collection of different tribes, so many different tribes. So out of those so many tribes, five were most prominent. They were the most powerful ones, and they are referred to as Panchjanya. Panch means five. So five most potent ones. So these names have been given by those tribes themselves. They have given these names to themselves, that okay, we five tribes will be called as Panchjanya because we are more powerful than the other ones. So these terms are not given by modern day historians. So Aryans migrated to India in several waves through the passes in northwestern mountains. So it is believed that these tribal peoples, they entered the mainland of India through the mountain passes. That means narrow passages through the mountains. As you are aware that India is well bounded by Himalayas and other Hindu Kush mountains. So if you look today's Pakistan, so today's Pakistan was actually yesterday's India. It was part of India. So if you look at the geography of India and Pakistan clearly, so these countries are bounded by mountains. So it is not easy from somebody from Europe or Russia to enter these lands easily. So these tribes have to pass through narrow mountain passes, that means through passages in northwestern mountains. So how do we know all this? How do we know that there were some tribes known as Aryans, that they entered India through mountain passes? We cannot make stories on our own. So how do we know? So we know all these facts from a holy book known as Rigveda. So it was the holy book composed by these tribal people themselves. So these tribal people were writing their own history in religious texts. So what is religious text for today's Hindus? So it can also be thought of the history of those times, because these people were writing about themselves in these religious textbooks. And the most important religious textbook is Rigveda. It is the ancient most text created by these Aryan tribes. So in this book itself, they have written so many things about themselves. So we get to know a lot of information about the lifestyle of these tribes, who they were, what they used to eat, what they used to wear, how they used to interact with each other. Everything, every source of information is Rigveda. So Rigveda is the prime source of information. So these tribes, after entering India, so they were looking for a new home. So after entering India, they settled in the northwest. Northwest means the same area which was previously occupied by Indus Valley, and also the plains of Punjab, because plains of Punjab are the neighboring areas of Indus Valley. So after spending a few years there, they started to move in the Indo-Gangetic plains. That means into deep India. So these people gave much importance to education and were fond of producing large volumes of religious texts. So these people, that means the Aryan tribes, So they were fond of education. That means they gave very much importance to education, spread of knowledge among themselves, and they were also involved in producing large number of religious texts, religious scriptures, Vedas, Upanishad, and all sorts of religious texts. So they led a nomadic life. So these tribes, they led a nomadic life. What is meant by nomadic life? That means they did not settle at one place. They did not make permanent homes, but they used to spend like 2-3 months at one place, and then they used to move to some other place. So why did they do so? Because they had cattle. They were not farmers. So if you are farmer, then you grow a crop. So if you grow a crop somewhere, then you have to wait there itself till the crop is grown. But if you are not a farmer, if you only have cattle, then you are always looking in search for pastures where your cattle can feed. So these people were basically cattle rearers. They were not much interested into agriculture. Please mind, their main source of food and livelihood was cattle rearing. So that's why they always used to look for newer places where their cattle can grow and feed. So they led a nomadic life, and they were mainly in search of pastures. So by 6th century BC, they had occupied the whole of North India. So by 6th century BC, they had occupied almost whole of north area, and they started to refer these areas that they occupied as Aryavarth. Why Aryavarth? Because they themselves were known as Aryans. So Aryavarth means where Aryans are living, Aryavarth. And Aryans were very good at horse riding. They were very good at horse riding. Please mind that people of Indus Valley were not aware of horse. Evidence of horse have been found in limited quantity from certain places in Gujarat. That means as a whole, Indus Valley people were not aware of how to use horses. So these new people who had come to that area, they were well trained in making, horse riding. So that was their power. Now, what about the geography of these people? That means what were their geographical understanding? So Aryans called the Indus Valley as Sapt Sindhav. Sapt means 7, Sindhav means Indus. So they witnessed, because they have settled in a place which was previously occupied by Indus Valley people. So Aryans started calling their new home as Sapt Sindhav, 7. That means land of 7 rivers with Indus as the base. That means they witnessed that the prime river of their home was Indus. So they started calling it Sapt Sindhav, 7 rivers, which also included Indus. But please remember this fact. According to them, Saraswati was the holiest river. It was not Indus. It was Saraswati, and they called Saraswati with the name Nadi Uttama. That means the best river. Nadi means river, Uttam means best. The best river. So please remember this fact that according to Rigveda, it's not river Indus, it's not river Ganga. Actually, it's river Saraswati, which is the most sacred to them. So Aryans also began to call the region as Aryavarth. That means after their own name, they began to call their home as Aryavarth, home, our home of the Aryans. And later, this region was called as Bharatvarsha. Bharatvarsha, why? Because out of all the tribes that formed the Aryan people, Bharat tribe was probably the most powerful one. Out of so many tribes, 5 were important, known as Panchjanya, and from that Panchjanya, Bharat tribe was the strongest. So because of the name of that tribe, this Aryavarth was also referred to as Bharatvarsha, and that is how India got its name, Bharat. So Rigveda mentions 21 rivers. So Rigveda is a detailed, it's a very, very respected book by billions of Hindus and people from other civilizations as well. Why? Because it is a storehouse of knowledge. Remember, like 3,500 years ago, they have so much of knowledge. So Rigveda mentions 21 rivers, and there is something very interesting about these rivers. They are mentioned in a definite order from east to west. That means from east to west, so many rivers, they were aware of so many rivers, so they noted down the order of the rivers starting from Ganga in the east, to Kabul, Kubha river, Kubha, today's Kabul, capital city of Kabul. So Kabul is the capital of Afghanistan. So Kabul gets its name from Kubha river, Kubha. So this shows that they were very good, they had a very good understanding of the geography of the area, because they knew the order, that which river comes first, which rivers come after that. They knew the particular order. So this is a very commonly asked question, that which river is mentioned in Rigveda. So Kubha river is mentioned in Rigveda. Please remember that Aryans had no idea of South India. So Aryans had no understanding of South India. So many a times option will contain South Indian rivers like Godavari, Narmada and all that. So Aryans did not knew of these rivers of South India, Krishna, Godavari, Kaveri, all these rivers, they were not aware of. They were aware of rivers only of North India, Pakistan and Afghanistan. So this entire time period of Vedic civilization is divided into two parts, two time periods. So first time period, the first 500 years, that means from 1500 BC to 1000 BC, and the next 500 years. So what was the necessity? Why do we need to divide this into two time periods? Because there are certain distinct features. So see, tribes came, they were new to this area. So for the first 500 years, after first 500 years, they took time to settle, they took time to develop their own culture. But after 500 years, their culture and their religious practices started to change. Their society began to change. So this change forces the historians to divide their existence, this whole Vedic civilization, into two different parts. We study the first 500 years separately and the later 500 years separately because of certain reasons. So let's see what were those reasons because of which the historians have divided this entire time period into two different zones. So let us see. So early Vedic period and later Vedic period is the name given to these two periods. So in early Vedic period, the caste system was flexible and based on profession rather than birth. So we will see what is caste system. So it was a system in which people were categorized based on their profession. That means if you were a priest, you were referred to as priestly class. That means class was identified. Humans were categorized. Categories were associated to humans. And each category was based on the profession, that if you are a priest, you belong to priest class. If you are a shopkeeper, that means you do not belong to the same class of priest. So this was known as caste system. So caste system took birth in earlier Vedic period, but it was not very rigid. It was flexible. But during later Vedic period, the caste system became very rigid and it became somewhat problematic. We will see in detail. So there was no concept of Shudra or untouchable. So in earlier Vedic period, there was no concept that humans were categorized, but there was no discrimination. In earlier Vedic period, there was no discrimination, there was no notion of untouchability. But during later time period, so Shudras or the lowest class, they became untouchable. That means the other classes, people belonging to the other classes, they started to look down upon the fourth class, the Shudras. So they were discriminated. They were discarded from the society, the privileges of the society. Restrictions were bound upon them. So next difference is, in earlier Vedic period, women were given lots of freedom. So they had choice. They used to get educated. They used to participate in politics. They were free to choose their own husbands. Even they were free to, widows can remarry. That if somebody became a widow, then they were allowed to remarry. That all this was happening in earlier time, the first 500 years. But in later time period, restrictions were imposed on women. That means women lost that much freedom. They were no more allowed to get involved into politics. They were no more allowed to become kings. Earlier, women also became king. Women were also allowed to lead their tribe. But in later years, that was not happening. So in earlier years, king was chosen by the people. For the first 500 years of the Vedic civilization, the concept of king was not hereditary. It was not that if the father dies, the son will become the king. People used to collectively decide that who is the best person amongst us, he only will become the next king. But during later Vedic period, all this changed. If father died, the son took father's place. That means if father king died, son became the next king. The early Vedic society was pastoral and semi-nomadic. That means, as I already explained to you, the early Vedic period, they were nomadic. They used to move from place to place because they had cattle. But later on, they became more involved into agriculture. So since they started cultivating things, since they started growing crops, so if you grow crop, then you have to stay there itself. You have to look after the crops. So in later Vedic period, they started to settle. They were no more roaming from here and there. The other prominent difference is that the earliest Veda, the first Veda, there are four Vedas in Hinduism. So the earliest of it, or the most respected, the sacred most, Rigveda, was written during this time period. So Rigveda was composed during this time period. That means as soon as Aryan tribes entered, they had Rigveda. They had Rigveda with them. They looked around their surrounding, they understood the geography of India, and they started writing. So that product is Rigveda. The literature that they found under those circumstances was Rigveda, the earliest record. So once they have settled, they have spent almost 500 to 600 years on Indian soil. Then they produced three more Vedas: Yajur Veda, Sam Veda, and Atharva Veda. So that's why, by noticing these small differences, the historians thought that it is better if we divide this entire time period into two and study it. So that is what they did. They divided this entire civilization into two different time periods. Early Vedic period, which is also known as Rig Vedic period. Why? Because Rig Veda was composed during that time, and this was happening in the first 500, and then the last 500 years is termed as later Vedic period. So how was the society? What was the societal structure of these people? So let us see. The earliest life seems to have been mainly pastoral. So I have already discussed in detail what is meant by pastoral. Now, cattles, because cattles were the main source of their income and livelihood, so cattles were so important that even wars were fought over cattle. That means these tribes were fighting amongst each other and also with the local people over the ownership of the cattle. They want to have more and more cattle. So wars were also fought to decide that who will get how many cattle. Now, society was mainly male dominated, though the society was male dominated, but women were treated with dignity. Equal status was given in the earlier years. The family was the smallest unit of the society. That means the family was treated as the smallest unit of society. It was primarily monogamous and patriarchal. That means one person, one wife. Monogamous. You can have only one life partner in initial days, and it was patriarchal. That means the family used to have a male head. Child marriage was not practiced. So child marriage was not practiced. Boys and girls were free to choose their life partners. Widow remarriage was allowed. So all this shows that status of women was well respected. Now, social inequality began to emerge because the kings and the priests, they started to accumulate more and more wealth for themselves. They started to accumulate more wealth, because of which social gap increased. There was big division between rich and poor. So that because of that, society began to change, and soon the society was divided into three groups. One, who were warriors, who were involved in fighting wars. The other, priests involved in religious activities, and then the common people, who included in day-to-day activities like shopkeeper, cobbler, blacksmith, and all that other common people. However, though the society was divided into groups, but people were free. They were free to choose their profession. That means if a person wanted to become a warrior, he could have become a warrior, or if he wanted to become a priest, he could have become a priest. Nobody could have said that no, you are not allowed to become warrior, or you are not allowed to become priest. So you were free to join whichever group you liked. That means your caste was for you to decide. You were supposed to decide that I am going to join this caste. But during later years, this caste system became so rigid that if your father was a cobbler, and if you are born to a cobbler, then the society used to say that since your father was a cobbler, you will also become a cobbler. You cannot become a priest, you cannot become a warrior. So it became rigid during later years. Now let us understand what was this caste system. So caste system, as we already discussed, was basically the grouping of human beings into categories based on, see, the initial concept was that you will be categorized based on your profession. That means if you are a priest, then you are separate, your class is defined that you are priest. If you are a warrior, you are defined that you are warrior. That means you belong to a totally separate caste. So four different castes were, see, these castes were termed as varna. So that's why it is also known as varna system. So there were four castes: brahmanas, who were basically teachers and priests. So teachers, why teachers? Because they used to give knowledge of religious scriptures. So they used to teach religious scriptures. Kshatriya, that means fighters. Kings were Kshatriyas. Kings, soldiers, military men, military general, all those belongs to the caste of Kshatriya. Vaishya, that means merchant, Vaishya community. Merchant, traders, bankers, those who used to do business. Shudra was the lowest caste. So Shudra caste was basically conceptualized as somebody who do not have knowledge, who could not do much in life. So they were supposed to only serve other people. So they were not supposed to gain knowledge. So they were thought that, okay, your purpose in life is to serve people from other caste. You are born for that purpose only. So, but in initial days, in the early Vedic period, though the caste system was there, but people could join any caste they like. Suppose a person wanted to become a priest. For that, he would have to study the religious text. After studying the religious text, he would have to give some oral examination, and after he passed those examinations, it was said that from today onwards you are a Brahmin. If his brother wanted to become a warrior, he would have to give test of his strength and he could have become a warrior. Suppose his third brother who was not intelligent, who was not strong enough, who was not good at business, by default he became a Shudra because he was of no other use, so he fell into the fourth category. So in initial days, the caste system was not rigid, but during later era it became problematic. That means no matter how smart you are, how strong you are, if your father is a cobbler or a barber, you are going to become that only. You cannot switch caste. So what was the political setup of that time period? So as I already told you that Aryans comprised of several tribes. So what was common in all these tribes? Their language. All these tribes were speaking the same language, Sanskrit. They followed the same god. They worshipped same god, ate same kind of food. So that's why they became a single unit. So each tribe had its own monarch king. So that means each tribe had its own king, and the king was known as Rajan. So today's time the kings are known as like prime minister, president. They are virtually the king. During those times, the title of the king was Rajan, or the post of the king was known as Rajan. So they had a tribal polity. So each tribe had his own chief, and these chief or the Rajan, they were responsible for the welfare of their own tribe. They used to look after their own tribe, and it was the responsibility of this Rajan or the king of the tribe to protect his tribe from the attack from other tribes, and also to go at war whenever necessary, because these tribes were also fighting among themselves for supremacy over land and cattle. They wanted to have more and more land and more cattle for themselves. There was no concept of standing army. That means these kings did not have huge army, but instead they depended on the support of their tribe. And whenever there was a war, the entire tribe came together to fight that war. So initially the position of the king was not hereditary. So initially kings were chosen by the people. It was not that father died, son will become. So people used to choose the most capable person among the tribe as their next king. So there were proper assemblies. That means the elderly people of the tribe, the influential people of the tribe, they formed a group known as Samiti. It was a political group which looked after day-to-day political activities. And it is this committee, which is known as Samiti during those times, which actually chose who will become the king. They used to take test that who is the most able person present in our tribe, let's make him king. But very soon all this came to an end. The position of king became hereditary. Why? Because a king wanted that, okay, after me my son should become the king. So all these malpractices began to take place, and the position of king became hereditary. The lowest unit in the Rigvedic society was the family or the kul. The family was the lowest society. It was known as kul. So kul was basically close relatives. You know, all the chacha, mama, taus, they are from the same family. So one single unit was known as kul. So now gram consisted of several families. So if in one single location, so many families started living together, so it became like a village concept of villages. So gram was basically grouping of families, so many families coming together at the same place of land. So that place became to be called as gram. So it was equivalent to a village. In today's terms, you can say that these were like those days village of ancient India. So Each gram had its own head. So head was known as grama, gramini. So gramini was the head of a gram, of a village. Now several villages formed a wish. Several villages formed a unit known as wish. That means somewhat like a small city or a district. So this wish was headed by a person or a post known as Vispati. Now several wish made for a Jan. Now this is the entire tribe Jan. That means Jan was the homeland of one single tribe. That means that was the unit for a tribe. So Jan was basically the entire tribe, and Jan was headed by a king who was known as Rajan. Ra plus Jan, protector of the Jan. The one who protects his tribe is known as Rajan. Now, what was the working of these Rigvedic assemblies? So, king was assisted by Purohits, that means priests, Senanis, fighters. So, priests, fighters, and Graminis, so head of the villages. King did not had unlimited powers. That means king could not make decisions on his own, but he have to take his entire tribe into confidence. So he cannot go to each and every people of his tribe to take permission. So that's why the Sabha and Samitis were created. Assemblies were created to represent the common people. So these assemblies were known as Sabha, Samiti, Vidhata and Gan. So these assemblies are mentioned in Rigveda, and even women were allowed to become part of these Sabha and assemblies. So what were basically these assemblies? Purpose of these assemblies to make the voices of people heard to the king. So they were representatives. They were like modern day member of parliaments. So they wanted to give advice to king, keep a check and balance. So these Sabha and Samiti. So out of all the different types of assemblies mentioned, so many different types of assemblies are mentioned. So out of these assemblies, Sabha and Samiti are the two most important ones. Please remember this. Sabha and Samiti. So this is very important question. Sabha and Samiti. So this Sabha and Samiti, their purpose was to keep a check on the power of the king. They wanted to keep the power of the king under control. There was no concept of tax, and see, these Sabha and Samitis were so powerful that they can also remove a king and make somebody a king, because they represented the will of the entire tribe. So there was no concept of tax. So there was no concept of taxation, and the king received offerings from his tribesmen. So kings receives offering from his tribesmen, and this offering was known as Bali. This is very important question. So this was known as Bali Pratha. That means part of earning was given to king. Why was it given to king? Because king have to take care of the tribe. He had expenses. He have to pay to the army. He have to pay to the priest. So how is going? King did not have money on his own. So he did not collect tax, but people themselves, out of their own voluntary volition, they used to give gifts to the king, their part of their earning to the king. Now, tribal conflicts. So Aryans regarded the local tribes as their enemies because they had come from somewhere else and settled on those locations. So they had feeling of enmity towards the local tribes, and they referred to the local tribes as Panis or Dasyus. So Aryans did not have a central king, but rather they were divided into tribes, and each tribe had its own king who was referred to as Rajan. So Aryans also fought amongst themselves. So these tribes, they were also fighting amongst themselves and also with the local tribes. So there is one very famous battle which you must remember, battle of 10 kings or Das Rajan Yuddh. Das Rajan, Rajan means king, Das means 10. So a battle in which 10 kings participated or 10 kings fought. So this battle was won by the Bharat tribe. Bharat tribe. So this tribe was fighting against an alliance of 10 other tribes. That's why 10, Das Rajan. And it is this Bharat tribe after which Bharatvarsh is named. So this battle was fought on the banks of the river Purushni, which is today known as river Ravi. So please remember this. Why I have given all this information? Because all these have been asked in previous years. So I do not miss out on any fact which have already been asked. So I have to include all that. So please do not skip any of these. These have already been asked. So now, what about their religious beliefs? So what were the important gods of the early Vedic period? So early Vedic period, these Aryans, they worshipped forces of nature such as sun, moon, river, trees. So they worshipped forces of nature and they worshipped them in form of gods and deities. The most important deity was Indra. So please remember the fact, most important deity of early Vedic era was Indra. So Indra was the god of lightning, thunder and war. So whenever there was a war, so the entire tribe used to worship Lord Indra, that may Lord Indra help us win the war. That's why he was the most important deity. The second position was given to Agni, the fire god, because these people used to conduct so many sacrifices. They used to burn fire and give sacrifices on that fire, and they used to believe that the smoke that came out of the fire used to reach the heaven. So they used to think that the fire god will communicate our sacrifice, our wishes to the god. So the fire was believed to act as the intermediary between God and man, because they used to sacrifice in fire and they used to see that smoke is coming out of it, which is going towards heaven. So they came with the idea that the fire must be carrying our message to the gods sitting in the heaven. So Varun was also an important god. So they occupied, I do not believe in this ordering, but see, this ordering has been given not by the historians but by the Aryans themselves. They used to categorize everything. They used to categorize human beings as well as gods. So Varuna occupied the third position, and Varuna was the god of water and sky. So water and sky, two critical elements. So Lord Varuna was thought to be the guiding god of these two natural elements. Soma was considered to be the god of the plants. So Som was considered to be the best plant, god of plants. So during the later Vedic age, Indra and Agni, that means the prominent gods of this era, the first 500 years. So how do we know that these gods are important, other gods are not important? Rigveda, because Rigveda is the single most source of information for the first 500 years. It is in that Rigveda that we see that Indra is given much respect, Agni is given much respect. But during later scriptures which were created after, during the later Vedic age, so by reading that we realize that Indra and Agni, they lost their importance during later times and they were replaced by newer gods. New gods started getting more attention, they were more worshipped. So this was the sum total of the early Vedic era, the life and times of the people in those first 500 years of Vedic civilization.